The queen of the underworld was listening very carefully to her husband's, Enki/Nergal, story, when he told her the truth about what had happened in terms of Isis. The story interested her in more than one aspect because Inanna as Ishtar was also her older cousin, as I will soon show the reader. Eventually, En.Ki came to the point. His plan was simple. He promised Ereshkigal, the queen of the underworld, that she could take Isis's place in the pantheon. If she started posing as Isis/Ishtar because it had to be a well-kept secret that Isis had escaped. In exchange, Ereshkigal would become the queen of Orion once the empire was conquered, and Enki would be the king, thus taking over Khan-Enlil's position. All she needed to do was to become the new mother of mankind. Marduk and her would copulate and create the new human species, which eventually would be us, Homo sapiens. The queen didn't hesitate for 1 second because this was all she could wish for in one big package. She could be the mother of the new slave race and the queen of the stars. She wholeheartedly agreed and took on the guise of Isis/Ishtar, and in one aspect, Inanna. This may come as a shock to many, but it's well recorded. In fact, most records say that Ereshkigal is the daughter of Nannar. In a previous paper, I proved that Nannar, Sin, and Enki are one and the same. This being the case, then Enki must be Ereshkigal's father. Why, then, does it say so often in the records that Ereshkigal is Inanna's/Ishtar's younger sister? To answer this question, I suggest the reader reads the following reference. She, Ereshkigal, is known chiefly through 2 myths, believed to symbolize the changing of the seasons, but perhaps also intended to illustrate certain doctrines developed dating back to the Mesopotamia period. Ereshkigal is therefore the sister of Ishtar. And from one point of view her counterpart, the symbol of nature during the non-productive season of the year. As the doctrine of 2 kingdoms becomes crystallized, the dominions of the 2 sisters are sharply differentiated from one another as one of this world and one of the world of the dead. One of these myths is the famous story of Ishtar's descent to Erkala, or Erilu, as the netherworld was called, and her reception by her sister who presides over it. Ereshkigal traps her sister in her dark kingdom and Inanna/Ishtar is only able to leave it by sacrificing her husband Dumuzi in exchange for herself. The other myth is the story of Nergal, the plague god. His offense against Ereshkigal, his banishment to the kingdom controlled by the goddess and the reconciliation between Nergal and Ereshkigal through the latter's offer to have Nergal share the honors of the rule over Erkala. In later tradition, Nergal is said to have been the victor, taking her as wife and ruling the land himself. If we read the above reference carefully, what do we see? Isis, the same deity as Ishtar and Inanna, being Ninurta's daughter, is descending to the underworld, where Ereshkigal kidnaps her identity and becomes Isis' counterpart in the underworld. Ereshkigal becomes Isis, the breeder. In reality, as it says in the quote, first paragraph, the dominions of the 2 sisters are sharply differentiated from one another as one of this world and one of the world of the dead. This means that Isis continues to live on the surface of the earth, away from her suppressors, while her cousin, Ereshkigal, Enki's daughter, and now his wife, takes on her characteristics but continues to live in the underworld. In other words, Enki marries Ereshkigal, but Marduk becomes the breeder, not mentioned in the quote. This is what the records actually say, and it's easy to see this now when we know what we know. In addition, let's take a quick look at Dumuzi as well, who Isis left in the underworld so that she could stay on the surface, all according to the myth. If we research Dumuzi, we find the following. Aside from this extended epic, The Descent of Inanna, a previously unknown courtship of Inanna and Dumuzi was first translated into English and annotated by Sumerian scholar Samuel Noah Kramer and folklorist Diane Wolkstein working in tandem, and published in 1983. In this tale Inanna's lover, the shepherd king Dumuzi, brought a wedding gift of milk in pails, yoked across his shoulders. Keep in mind here that the myths say that Dumuzi is Inanna's/Isis lover and husband. Now, look at what Dumuzi is called, the Shepherd King. Isn't that interesting? Who else was called the Shepherd King? Here is a hint, the first indication that the God of Israel is a shepherd to his people Israel is found in Jacob's words of farewell blessing to his sons in Genesis 48. Jacob, Abraham's grandson, spoke of the God before whom my fathers Abraham and Isaac walked, the God who has been my shepherd. The God who has been my shepherd all my life to this day, the angel who has delivered me from all harm. As we can see, and this is known to all Christians, both God and Jesus are shepherds, and Jesus is known as the Shepherd King. According to my research, Jesus, Iesu, is Enki/Ea/Lucifer, and Jehovah and his counterpart, Jehovah, are both Enki/Ea/Lucifer as well. Consequently, Dumuzi, whom Isis, symbolically exchanged for herself, is Enki/Nergal. Now, when this has been established, the entire quote above makes sense and fits right into our story. In conclusion, Ereshkigal took over the role as Isis the breeder, and because Isis was no longer Enki's lover and still lived on the surface, an exchange took place, where Ereshkigal took Isis's place, both as N.Keys/Nergal/Dumuzi's lover and husband. Ereshkigal became the new breeder, helping to create Homo Sapiens, i.e. us. This means, in plain language, that genetically, today's global elite are the descendants of Marduk and Ereshkigal. Therefore, they have Enki's DNA via both the. In conclusion, Ereshkigal took over the role as Isis the breeder, and because Isis was no longer Enki's lover and still lived on the surface, an exchange took place, where Ereshkigal took Isis's place, both as Enki's/Nergal/Dumuzi's lover and husband. Ereshkigal became the new breeder, helping to create Homo Sapiens, i.e. us. This means, in plain language, that genetically, today's global elite are the descendants of Marduk and Ereshkigal. Therefore, they have Enki's DNA via both these beings, and they have Ninurta's DNA via the genes that were still used from the Enki/Isis bloodline that existed before the flood. Enki/Nergal, in some instances, also took on the role as the god Apollo or sometimes Apsu, and Ereshkigal also became known as the Queen of Apollo. In more recent history, when Enki in the Hindu tradition took on the name of Shiva, Ereshkigal became famous under the title Queen of Shiva or Queen of Sheba. Much of what is now explained happened during the Babylonian/Akkadian Empire, when Enki had assigned the leadership in that part of the world to his son Marduk, the biblical Satan, but the first version of Enki's minions, who we today call the global elite or the Illuminati, were of the same seed line as that which had been used before the deluge, and that was the Lucifer-Isis seed line, created by copulation between Enki and Isis. Thus, the Marduk-Isis seed line was the second version of the global elite, created in Babylon, after the deluge. The third version was the Marduk-Ereshkigal seed line, to which the majority of the global elite of today belongs. The powers that be, PTB, thus, are of pure Orion blood and a mix between Ninurta's line through Isis and Marduk, who represents the Luciferian satanic Enki bloodline. They are all virtually the same because Ninurta and Enki had the same parents, but for the gods themselves, the difference is considered huge because the more righteous gods of the pantheon want to have no part in Lucifer's tricks and manipulative manners. They must feel highly assaulted the way they've been depicted in the eyes of humans after the records were distorted in Babylon. Homo sapiens, today's version of mankind, was recreated after the flood from the template used before the flood, with some adjustments. Last, a fifth version of humankind was created by Isis, who basically recreated the androgynous Namliyu, the primordial womankind.